Bella's story. So, my name's Jenny, and I'm Isabella's mum. And when she was 12, she got very small pain in her foot, nothing significant at all, but it began to progress and progress over the course of a couple of weeks. So we went down the normal route, we had x-rays, she was in a boot and on crutches. We weren't particularly too worried at the time, but little by little, over the course of another month, she began to not be able to put her foot down at all. So we were back in A&E, and at that stage we had an MRI and had a referral to an orthopaedic surgeon, just so he could see what was going on, and we were trying to figure out what was happening to her. At that point, we weren't particularly that worried either, but she was wearing a boot, an orthopaedic boot, but not weight bearing. I remember really distinctly, actually, we were away for the weekend and we hadn't been swimming as a family or had done anything for a while, and she took the boot off, and when the boot came off, in order for her to go swimming, her foot from her knee, her leg from her knee down had turned purple and swollen, and she was in excruciating pain, like a burning pain, a nerve pain, and her foot was turned in. So at this point, I got a terrible fright and thought, is it a blood clot or what's happening here? Because her foot looked really damaged at this stage. So at that point, we had more MRIs done, tried to rule out as much as possible, and eventually got to an orthopaedic surgeon, and he just put her into a cast, and she was still on crutches. So I suppose we were 4 months in at this stage, and she was now casted and not walking. Eventually, a month later, when the cast came off, we realised we were in serious trouble because she could no longer tolerate air, vibration, noise, and her foot couldn't be rested on anything. So it rendered it impossible to go to school. She couldn't carry anything because she had to hop, and even the slightest touch would cause absolute agonising pain, which meant she couldn't sleep because she couldn't rest the foot, and her thigh muscle and her back and her neck began to get involved because she had to hold her foot at an angle at all times to protect it. At that stage, we were referred to a neurologist, and we were told that she needed to go to psychology, and we were given a high dose of gabapentin, which she started in that January. So January and February and March went, and there was little or no improvement. I suppose having such a long time with not any sleep and not any physical activity other than the crutches, she was just exhausted. So she was doing physio all the time at that stage, but physio had to be completely modified in order for her to be able to do it. So it was tiny, tiny things like the bare touch. We were trying to use a lot of ball games so that she would, disconnect from the pain of the foot, and a lot of distraction. But at that stage, she hadn't been to school for 3 months. And eventually we got a diagnosis in that April time, and she was told she had complex regional pain syndrome, which is not that well known in the medical field and pretty hard to fix. Some people will say it can't be fixed, that it's like a remission type illness. So I suppose we needed hospital intervention. We needed to try and find a path on how to fix her, I suppose. So it's a multidisciplinary thing. We were told psychology, pain medication, huge amount of physio, a huge amount of hydrotherapy, and because her foot had turned in, we were told surgery was the only way she'd be able to straighten her foot again. Because the foot was in so much pain, it turned itself in and locked itself in a position that it could not possibly stay locked in, because it would end up with her ankle having to be broken and her foot, I suppose, restructured. The trouble with that is the brain fully believes the foot is under attack and will not tolerate any intervention at all, really. So we were kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, but she wasn't getting any better. So we went with the hospital protocol, and in fairness, at the time she was on loads of different medication, so we were trying all sorts of things. She was taking CBD oil, she was taking melatonin to sleep, she was taking high dose of gabapentin, she was taking topical creams, diaphene creams. She was taking the highest dose of diaphene every day that she could take. You're only supposed to stay on that for a few weeks, but we had to keep her on it to even dampen down the pain any amount at all. She went to hospital and she had an operation to straighten her foot. And at the time, then we had to do a lot of touching. There was a lot of touching of the foot to try and, I suppose, retrain the brain. Psychology gave her loads of tips on how to cope with the pain, but we didn't want to have to live a life just coping with pain and trying to get through each day or week. It was more, we wanted to find a cure or an outcome that she'd potentially, I suppose, I was hoping that she'd even be able to maybe even get back to school, or, you know, we were looking for small steps. So after the operation, the cast went back on again to keep her foot straight. But every time, pain was just still there at, I suppose, at about a 10. It went from ranging from 6 to 10 over different varying times over the course of those months. So it was a couple of days before Christmas, and we had an appointment booked in with Michael O'Doherty and Tina. And I suppose we were feeling very defeated because we had been through the pain clinic, we'd been through rehabilitation for a few weeks in hospital, and the pain was still intense and very high, and it was coming up to Christmas, and we both felt, I don't know how we're going to get through the Christmas, but I don't even know how we're going to get through the next year. You know, we weren't looking forward to anything weeks in advance because we weren't showing any signs of improvement, and we were beginning to lose hope, really. So I had asked so much of Isabella that full year before. So we felt defeated. We'd nowhere else to go. And I remember saying to her, it was a couple of days before Christmas, and we were driving home from Dublin from the hospital, and I just said, we're on our own, kid. I don't know how we're going to get through this, and I don't know what to do. And all the rest of the time I'd said, oh, you know, we can try this, we'll do this. And I was so gung-ho. It was like I was doing a master's in CRPS. I knew everything I needed to know. I researched. I was in touch with people in America. I was on webinars. It just took over our life. And I wasn't working at this stage. I had to give up work in order to mind her because she needed full-time care. She couldn't get herself a drink because she had to hop. She used to crawl around the house because she got too tired from hopping. She dislocated her knee from hopping, her good knee. And yeah, it just was, I suppose, as bad as it could possibly get. There was no life at the end of each day. We were exhausted. So I had an appointment. I managed to get an appointment with Michael and Tina. However, I was slightly reluctant to go because Isabella had been to so many different therapists. We were seeing 4 people a week consistently. And we were nearly burnt out, actually, from seeing people. And we were frightened, I suppose, to give anything a bit of hope. Because if it didn't work, then where next, you know? So it was, I think, around the 20th of December, and I know that Michael and Tina were finishing up for Christmas, and very luckily we got to come for an appointment on that day, and I wasn't sure what to expect. I was hoping for the best. I was just hoping that Isabella would feel comfortable, actually, getting the work done, but also not think, God, this is out there, what are you even trying to do with me here? But so when we arrived, she actually had quite a good understanding of what was happening because Michael explained everything to her. And I suppose the huge shock for me was as Michael worked on her foot, he said, what do you feel? What do you feel? And she said, I feel warmth. So she felt warmth going down to her foot, whereas before there was nothing to feel other than pain. So at a pain 10, you can't do anything. You can't barely think straight, and you can't function. So I suppose a lot of the time Isabella was trying to distract herself with television, phone, eating, but she wasn't able to communicate really with people. She didn't even want people around her because the effort it took to, I suppose, act. She used to be acting this pain-free existence that didn't exist, I suppose. So after her first treatment with Michael, she went from a 10 to a 7. Now, that was huge because she had no movement in her foot, and she actually still had a cast on at the time, but the toe part was out of the cast. So he was saying to her, try and wiggle your toes, but there was no movement in her toes at all. but the colour that was very, very deep purple began to get a little bit lighter, and the foot didn't look as swollen or as under pressure immediately, actually, which was wonderful. So she had a super long session that day, and as we were driving home, she was on the phone to her granny and her granddad and my husband to her dad, and saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe it! I'm not at a 10," and I felt warm, but her whole system seemed to be buoyed up, and she just seemed in much better form, I suppose, better form than we'd seen her in a long time. So as it turned out, we ended up having a pretty peaceful and nice Christmas with the family that year. We shelved everything. There was no physio and there was no treatments, no nothing for a full 2 weeks, and just, I suppose, got on with the business of just trying to get a bit of normality back into the house. So we then came for our 4 full sessions with Michael early January, and that was a game changer because she started to move her toes. The swelling in her foot went down, so the cast began to get a bit wobbly and would be a bit spinny on her foot. She could kind of move it, which meant that the full leg had kind of settled a little. So it was another 3 or 4 weeks before we got the cast off, and that's when the real work began, I suppose. We came back out to Michael and Tina then, and I think we really went gung-ho at it. We did a full 4 or 5 sessions in a week, 4 sessions in the week, and by the end of that week she was able to wiggle her toes. The colour was looking great in the foot, and we went back to the hospital then after that month. However, the foot was still dropped and turned in, so the intervention that she'd had done in the hospital, it looked like it had failed, I suppose, temporarily, because the foot hadn't really gone back to the right shape and it wasn't sitting right, and it was still locked in a locked position. So at that stage we were told that we needed another surgery, and we were adamant that that wasn't going to happen. So we came back to Michael again and we said, right, we're going to do everything in our power not to have this happen. So Bella worked really hard with Michael and also with physio. We were doing physio every single day, and I don't think she would have been able to do the physio physically or emotionally if she didn't have the backup of the bioenergy work. So Tina and Michael retrained her to put on trousers or put on leggings. She was retrained to put on a sock, and little by little, by desensitising it, by putting on the sock and putting on the trousers and doing the physio, huge amount of physio desensitisation, the movement, colour and feeling came back into her feet and toes, and eventually it was tap 1 toe on the ground, tap 2 toes on the ground, and eventually she began to weight bear. It took months. It didn't happen overnight. It was January, February, March. It was maybe 5 months in before she actually walked. But I suppose the belief was there that she was always going to walk. It just, after we began to get treatment, I suppose hope flowed in, and we knew that she was going to get back on the 2 feet. So it was amazing. So we're 18 months on now, and Isabella is free of pain, off her medication, and heading to play football tonight. So we've come full circle from being in a wheelchair and chronic pain to our life back again. And I fully believe that if we hadn't got here to Michael in that Christmas 2020, that we would not be in this situation. So I'm absolutely delighted with the outcome, and coming to Michael O'Doherty was a huge turning point in our recovery, in Isabella's recovery, but our recovery as a family.